Welcome to class number 5. You guys are enjoying the journey along with me? Very good. And like I said, we're going to continue to give these classes. So bring friends, bring family. All right, we're going to start with a story. The title of tonight's class is The Morning After, because until now we've been talking about the soul and the person that actually has been deceased. But tonight we're going to focus on the ones left behind. And let's begin with the story.
Jean-François Gravelet, better known as Blondin, was a famous tightrope walker and acrobat. He's perhaps best known for his many crossings of the tightrope, 1,100 feet in length, suspended 160 feet above Niagara Falls in the USA. His act can be watched by large crowds and begin with a relatively simple crossing using a balancing pole. Then he would throw away the pole and amaze the audience. On one occasion, he crossed the tightrope on stilts. On another occasion, blindfolded. Another time, he stopped halfway to cook and eat an omelette. In 1860, a royal party from England came to watch Blondin perform. After his normal spectacular crossings, he then wheeled a wheelbarrow from one side to the other as the crowd cheered. Next, he put a sack of potatoes into the wheelbarrow and wheeled that across. The crowd cheered louder. Then he approached the royal party and asked the Duke of Newcastle, "Do you believe that I could take a man across the tightrope in this wheelbarrow?" "Yes, I do," said the Duke. "Ah, hop in," replied Blondin. The crowd fell silent, but the Duke of Newcastle would not accept Blondin's challenge. "Is there anyone else here who believes I could do it?" asked Blondin. No one was willing to volunteer.
Okay, what's the message of the video? Of the short clip? I want to ask you, Danny, since you just walked in. What's the message of the video? Message of the video is, since you guys are all just climbing ahead to answer the question, is that often there's a big disparity between what we believe in theory and what we actually practice. So especially when it comes to this very sensitive subject as the passing of a loved one, so we all have theories on how we're supposed to behave and how we think we would react, but not necessarily that's actually the way we do react when we're faced with a tough situation. So tonight we're going to start off with is an article in the New York Times with two different texts. Text number 1 on page 170, and you'll see how the story of two women who were faced with tragedy and how they reacted. Let's have a volunteer to read. No, Monica? Oh. Doug, go ahead. Text number 1.
Heather Lindquist was in the kitchen cleaning up after lunch when she heard a dull thud. It sounded as if it came from the hallway, and it was just a little too loud to ignore. "Boy," she yelled, "what are you up to?" There was no answer. She found her 2 boys playing quietly on the couch in the living room. They giggled. "You jokers," she said with a smile. "What was that sound?" They shrugged. "Where is your father?" Without waiting for an answer, she ran towards the hallway. She cried out in fear when she saw her husband, John, writhing on the floor. John had severe asthma. He was taking a new medication and it seemed to be working. But suddenly he had collapsed in the worst attack he ever had. Heather tried everything she could think of to save her husband's life. Then she called an ambulance. The rest was a blur. John died of cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. Heather was 34 years old. Her boys were 5 and 7. At that moment, John's death felt like the worst thing that could ever happen to her. Heather Lindquist had lived her entire life in the same quiet suburban community in northern New Jersey. She and John had been high school sweethearts. They married and purchased a small ranch house They had children, they got a dog, the schools were good, and the community was stable. Heather thought that the television was on more than it should be, but other than that, everything seemed in order. Then John died and she had to rethink it all. Now she was a single parent. She had to find new ways to earn money and also to find extra time to be with her boy. And somehow she had to constrain everyone's anguish. She found strength she didn't know she had. It was lonely and painful at times. But Heather found meaning and vigor and even joy in the idea that she was going to make it. I expected to collapse. I really did. That's what I wanted to do. That would have been the easiest thing to do, Heather explained, but I couldn't. Each day I got up and did what I had. The days passed and somehow it was okay. The boys were great. They were upset in the beginning, of course. We all were. They hung in there, and we stayed together. I love those boys so much. John would have been proud of them.
And that's the story of Heather. Alan, text number 2? Text number 2. Oh, wait, 172.
In 2004, Stephanie Mulberg of Short Hills, New Jersey, lost her son Eric, 13, to Ewing sarcoma bone cancer. 4 years after Eric's death, Ms. Mulberg, now 48, walked around like a zombie. I felt guilty all the time, guilty about living, she said. I couldn't walk into the deli because Eric couldn't go there any longer. I couldn't play golf because Eric couldn't play golf. My life was a mess. And I couldn't talk to my friends about it because after a while they didn't want to hear about it. Stephanie, you need to get your life back, they say. But how could I? On birthdays, I'd shut the door and take the phone off the hook. Eric couldn't have any more birthdays, why should I?
So here we have two reactions of two women who faced tragedy. On one hand, we have Heather, who says they hung in there and we stayed together. John would have been proud of them. On the other hand, we have Stephanie, who said Eric couldn't have any birthdays. Why should I? So you see the questions for discussion on page 172. Heather and Stephanie reacted differently to the respective losses. Is one response healthier than the other? Is Heather in denial? Is Stephanie overreacting? Why did the two women react differently? Do you know someone who did or did not deal with the loss? Why was that person ill-equipped or ill-equipped to cope with his or her grief? What do you say? You don't know.
Each one reacts differently.
Everybody, it's true. Everybody reacts differently. That's true. Heather isn't in denial. What Heather realizes is that she has two little kids depending on her, and she has no choice but to forge on. And which my family, we had a similar story. This here's my nephew. One Motzei Shabbos, one Saturday night, I got a call from my brother. It was a June night that I have to come to North Miami right away. My nephew, 2-year-old nephew, suddenly passed away. So we went to my brother's house, and my sister-in-law was in a state of shock, and she was pregnant. And the doctor told her that as much as you feel like you can't eat and you can't go on, for the sake of your 6 other children and the one you're carrying, you must go on. It was a very, very tough transition for my sister-in-law. So Heather isn't in denial, and Stephanie, on the other hand, isn't overreacting. She's overcome by what's called chronic grief. We definitely need our psychologists and residents tonight. She has chronic grief, and she's emotionally handicapped. So why do they react differently? Number one is you can't judge. Everybody, like you said, everybody reacts differently, and we don't know. This was just an article in the New York Times, and doing research, you find out that Stephanie actually had more family. She had a son, and she had a husband. And what's interesting to point out is that Heather's husband died kind of suddenly, didn't really suffer, died right away. Stephanie, on the other hand, her son had something called, let me know if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, osteosarcoma. Osteosarcoma is a terrible cancer which eats away at the bone, and you have to amputate high up over the bone and by the elbow, by the shoulder, by the hip, and the person dies a very painful, extracted death. So here you see, just from this reading, we really don't know what people go through, and everybody reacts differently. But the purpose of the class, of tonight's class, is what does the Torah say? How are we supposed to move on? What's the perspective of the people left behind? How do we face this tragedy to reemerge into life again, to become, I guess you could say, a part of society? So the class is going to be split up into 3 parts. The first part is going to be the Torah's view on mourning, how Torah says we're supposed to go about it. Number 2 is how do we cope with grief, and number 3 is the etiquette of Shiva, how we're supposed to behave when we're in the house of mourning. Before we begin, it's important to ask the question: is grieving okay according to the Torah? Everybody says yes. Right. But think about it. Grieving means you're upset and you're sad that something bad happened, right? But as Jewish people, don't we believe everything comes from God? So why should we be upset? Let me go off on a side subject for a second. When you're sick, I don't mean to put you out of business, but how do you know you're allowed to go to a doctor? If a person is sick, maybe you can say God wants you to be sick. Don't go to a doctor.
You have to take good care of your body.
You also have to believe in God. No, I'm saying. So there's actually a verse in. Whoops, went too far. There's actually a verse. The slide is a little out of order. I apologize. There's actually a verse which commands us that we have to go to the doctor, as opposed to, we'll do Socrates first. Everybody here knows who Socrates is? Socrates is a great Greek philosopher. Socrates was a person who challenged conventional wisdom. He challenged everything. Everything that everybody said was the way, he challenged it. He made the government so crazy, they imprisoned him, and they prosecuted him, and they sentenced him to death. For, I know this sounds like the Soviet Russia, for crimes against the state. And in his cell, he sent a message to his student. You see in text number 3. Tell this to Evenese, Cebes, Socrates said, and bid him of good cheer. So you read here in text number 3, what he's saying is that an intellectual person is not afraid of death. Why? Because even back then, they were enlightened back then too, and they knew that everybody has a soul, and the soul is greater than the body. So what limits the person's ability to understand? The body. So once we exit the body, we are able to have more understanding. So Socrates looked at it as when a person has passed, they're able to learn and know a lot more. As you see, the last paragraph, the quote of Socrates is, any man who has the spirit of philosophy will be willing to die, not afraid to die. In fact, they say that Socrates' students paid off the guards and he was able to go free. He would have been able to go free, but he said, if I go free, then it looks like I'm afraid of death, and I'm not afraid of death. So Socrates is the opinion that death is no big deal. Here's the Torah's view. Like I said before, in the Torah's view, it says in Exodus, chapter 21, verse 19, when a person is injured, if a person injures another person, then the plaintiff has to pay for the doctor bills. Workman's comp, right? And Rabbi Yishmael taught us, it's from this verse, the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, it's from this verse that we are commanded, that we are allowed to go to a doctor. That we don't just rely, that's based on what God says. So we see here right away that the Torah, and as much as conventional wisdom tells you something as a Jewish person, we always have to ask ourselves, what does the Torah say? So as much as grieving and mourning seems like the normal thing, we see over here that the Torah does not agree with Socrates. We have to have, when a tragedy happens, we are allowed to mourn, and we're going to see later, we have to mourn. Okay, so the question is like this. In previous lessons, we said that the soul is better than the body, right? The soul goes on to a better place. So we shouldn't mourn, we should celebrate. Aside from the part where we say, okay, God allows you to mourn. But think about it. Let's discuss what mourning is all about. Text number 4a on page 174. Manuel, go ahead.
The Torah does not disallow mourners to cry because it is human nature to be moved to tears when taking leave of loved ones, even if they are still alive and merely traveling to a distant location.
Okay, so the number one reason the Torah says is it's a natural reaction. When you say goodbye, those of you who have sent your kid off to college or something, you cry. That's a natural reaction. Now, how much more so when a person passes on is going to be crying. There's a great line in the Gemara that says God does not expect the supernatural from people. God understands that we're human. The Torah goes according to the nature of people. So God understands that there's pain and there's going to be crying. Text number 4b. It's a short one. Monica, go ahead. No? Israel, fill in for your wife.
Mourners find comfort in crying and in wallowing in their sorrow to the point that the body is weakened by the intense emotions in the same manner as happy person finds contentment in various forms of amusements.
Okay. Anyone see the difference between text 4a and text 4b? Subtle difference? Yeah. And share? No. The first one is that it's a natural reaction. What Maimonides says in text 4b is that the crying is healing. It's very good for a person to cry it out, and because then they feel better. As you see here, when a loved one passes, we feel that void, and naturally that translates into sadness. So there's whoops. So yes, so mourning has a psychological benefit. So text number 4c. Text number 4c is actually very interesting. We brought him up. He's a halachic authority called the Radvaz, David ibn Zimra. Text number 4c. It's quite long, so read it yourself, and I'll say it out loud. Someone asked him a question and says, is it okay to not cry by a funeral? Is that a bigger man or bigger person of a person if someone doesn't cry by the funeral? Talking about over here a loved one. So Radvaz says not only is it not okay, it's offensive and objectionable. It demonstrates heartlessness, because we have received the Torah, believe that this world is of great value. As we said in previous classes, while the next world is more pleasurable, this world is more important. So therefore, crying and shedding tears after the passing of a relative is the way of the pious and the prophets and the people of good deeds. And this is why the Torah says 3 days for mourning and 7 days for Shiva, as we said. And we find many stories in the Torah of mourning. When Abraham lost his wife Sarah, he mourned. When Jacob thought he lost his son, he mourned. Mourning is a standard that we're all supposed to do. And a person shouldn't be above it. So the number one is it's natural. Number two is it's therapeutic. And number three is we cry after the great loss, because a person was here to accomplish a mission. And now that person is not here anymore. So that person is not accomplishing that mission in this world, which is much greater than the next world. Therefore, that's a reason to cry.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Don't most people, I'm not talking about mourning, I'm talking about crying, going out. When a loved one's passed, they're not crying for missing the loved one, or like you said, they're going on, they're crying for their own self. They're lost.
And this is exactly what this class is about. We're focusing on the person and their loss. We're not focusing on the soul. We'll touch on it later on, but this is mainly, yes, for the person. Exactly. This law is dealing with the people left behind.
That's what text 4a explained us.
Right.
It's a way to clean yourself.
Right.
I don't know if it was Rabbi Nachman that says that you could be sad at least 1 hour later, no more than an hour.
Right. Okay. That's right. We're Nachman from Breslov who pushed happiness. Even Tisha B'av, the 9th of Av, was a happy day. Right. But that's a difference. But there's a difference between depression and mourning. And that's what the line we're trying to delineate here in this class. Depression is not good. Mourning is good. Depression is not good. There's a difference. And all these processes of the Shiva are meant to help a person not sulk and regress into depression, and to further the process of mourning and healing. So we see over here the Torah does not agree with Socrates at all. The Torah says that a person is supposed to cry because it's a great loss. And not only is it therapeutic and natural, and we cry over the loss, as you see, Maimonides writes in text number 5, we are commanded to mourn over the passing of a next of kin. So, there you go. So this mitzvah is for, mourning is for an immediate relative, a spouse, parent, a sibling, or a child. Okay. So now that we covered the grounds that mourning is a necessity, both psychological and it's a law. Now the question is, how do we go about it? Before we go, any questions? Let's go. Okay. So if you see in figure 5.1 on page 177, there is a graph there which shows you there are 4 periods, 4 stages of mourning. The first one is called. It was there for now. Okay. Sorry. Okay. The first one is called aninut. Onain means that, and a person who's in a state of onain, this is a period between passing and interment. And in this period, a person is so consumed by grief, he's not allowed to be distracted by anything, not even doing mitzvot. So a man wouldn't put on tefillin. A person eating would not make a bracha. And all these different positive mitzvot that normally we have to do, a person does not do because he's so consumed by the death of his loved one. That is from when the person passes until the burial. Once there's the burial, it's the most intense period. We don't attempt to comfort them or console them. The next of kin are absolved, and nothing should distract them. Okay. Oh, sorry. There you go. This is important. We'll get to this in a second. Is that the mourners tear their clothing. This is usually done in the chapel, but a person is still in the state of aninut. We'll get to renting the clothing in a moment. Next stage is Shiva. The Shiva is a 7-day period. They have to stay in the house, and they're not a lot of work. They sit on low stools. They wear their torn garments. They don't wear leather shoes. And it's a mitzvah to visit the mourners in their home. That is for the 7 days, which really never turns out to be 7 days. 7 complete days, because the day in which the person is buried, that counts as 1 day, and then Shabbos there's no mourning, and then the day where they get up, the 7th day, there's a concept in halacha, in Jewish law, which part of the day is considered as the entire day. So they get up. For those of you of Sat Shiva, you'll know that you get up right away in the morning. So it's really 4.5 days. But it's called Shiva because it comprises of 7 days. And then after that is the Shloshim. The Shloshim is a lesser period of mourning. After getting up from Shiva, you resume normal life. You can wear normal clothing or new clothing. You can get a haircut. You can participate in festive occasions. And then there's the 12 months. And the 12 months, which is only for a person who lost a parent. Everyone else is 30 days. So we light a candle, and we do not go to weddings or things like that, or festive occasions. These are the 4 stages of mourning. So the purpose of all these stages is that. Sorry, let me rephrase that, because I'm making a definitive statement when it's not. God gave us a multitude of mitzvot. And they all have many reasons. And some of them we know the reasons, some of them we don't know the reasons. And some of them have benefits. One doesn't take away from the other. But what I want to discuss now is the psychological benefit that we have when a person goes through these 4 stages. So step number 1 is, what's the hardest part when a person loses a loved one? What's the hardest thing? Well, okay. Letting go. I want to say that especially as we go to the end of the class, we don't ever let go. But to rephrase what you're saying is acceptance. Acceptance that the person who I love is no longer here. So how do we go about adjusting to that painful reality that the person that I was able to hug and touch a few moments ago is not here anymore? So let's look at what the Torah says. The Torah tells us a story. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, where Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, and they sold him, and they wanted to convince Jacob that Joseph was dead. So what do? Well, you guys have gone to Hebrew school? So they took Joseph's colorful coat, and they slaughtered a goat, and they dipped it into the goat's blood, right? You see in text number 6, it has part of the text there. They dipped it in the goat's blood, and they went to Jacob and they said, do you recognize this tunic? And Jacob said, he recognized it. It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces. Here's the key part. Jacob rent his garments and put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son. He mourned his son for many days. So we see here that tearing one's garments is a sign of mourning, and it's the first step towards acceptance. Because at that moment, a person is so torn up inside, a person is so numb and dull, nothing makes sense, and the first reaction is denial. It can't be true. That's why you have that emotional, visceral reaction of renting the clothing. You can't take. You want to break out of yourself, and that's why we rent our clothing. Which, on the side note, I actually wanted to read it from the book, but as you guys realize, the book used to be here. It's not here anymore. My books grow legs. There's a great book by Maury Slam, Dr. Rabbi Maury Slam. It's called The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning. I want to read just a little bit about the ribbon. Allow me to go off on a little bit of a rant here. This is what he says in his book. The grief we express at such moment taps the deepest wells of our humanity, and the manner in which we manifest it should be equally authentic. The anguish is exquisite, and one might even say sacred, and the way in which we express it should be no less sacred. It is appropriate that this form of release of sorrow be sanctioned by faith and by centuries of ancient custom going back to biblical times. How shallow, how disappointing, and how pitiably trivial, therefore, to symbolize these authentic sentiments, not by an act of historic and religious significance, by a little black ribbon or button, invented by enterprising American undertakers. Tradition calls upon us to tear our garments, to put a mark of our broken heart on our clothing, and not to vent our feelings on a meaningless and impersonal strip of cloth pinned on by a stranger. That it's the Jewish way is to rent our garments, and sometimes to tear.
Rent? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, rent. That's we tear our clothing by the lapel. And as a rabbi, sometimes I do funerals. Sorry. So sometimes I'll go to a family and tell them, the custom is they just spent thousands of dollars on paying for a religious burial, and they don't want to tear the $35 shirt. And I'm not, like I said, that's not the time to give lectures, as we'll see later. That's not proper etiquette. But it's a time that it's meant for a religious practice, and that's our tradition. So the first step is kriya, tearing our garments, and it helps us accept it, not in denial, and then we can move on to the next stage. Once we come to terms with the loss, then we can move on to the next stage, which is Shiva. Now, Shiva is for 7 days. It's very important that we don't rush back. We have here doctors, and they'll tell you when a person injures themselves physically, when you go to the gym, right? It's very important when you don't rush back physically from an injury. Why? You'll make it worse. I remember when I broke my hand when I was 16, wise guy, right? So I had to change casts. So the doctor starts squeezing my wrist and says, "Does that hurt?" No. "Does this hurt?" No. So I thought, okay, I'm healed. "Oh yeah, you're healed?" All of a sudden he squeezed my wrist. I'm like, right? We cannot rush back because it actually has a negative effect. the Torah tells us we have to deal with the loss. So the next step is Shiva, coming to terms, and we don't rush back. Let me see here. There we go. So the Kriya, the tangible expression, it counteracts denial, triggers. One second, not up to the video yet. It triggers mourning for those who are numb. The purpose here, we'll get to the video in just a moment, is that the grieving should be always progressive, always forward moving, not regressing into depression and to being a person being swallowed by their sadness. I want to present a very interesting video. Here.
When a loved one passes away, Jewish law calls upon the immediate family to experience the rite of Shiva. Approximately 7 days are spent in mourning and receiving comfort from visitors. A doctor, a rabbi, and an acclaimed lecturer offer personal reflections on the rite of Shiva.
When someone dies, the relationship with the deceased doesn't end. The relationship with the person who died continues. It just changes from a face-to-face interpersonal relationship to a relationship of memories, to a relationship of legacies. By engaging the mourners in this process, you're helping them make that shift.
The purpose of Shiva is meant for the mourner to be able to take that time aside from the affairs of life and the affairs of the world, to contemplate, to introspect, and to share with others the life they had, with the person they loved. People come to visit and console and try to bring comfort to the mourner.
The structure of it and the formality of it gives a sense of relief. You know, when you're grieving, it's very all over the place, very hard to contain. And the structure of the Shiva brings a relief and a sense of conformity, which is quite redeeming.
If you want to comfort or help comfort the griever, what you're in essence doing by taking an interest in the person who's died is helping that person preserve his life.
I remember hearing people say things to me that was almost like they said it and the words stopped right here. But days and weeks and months later, they slowly made their way in.
The point of the Shiva is not to come up with anything brilliantly comforting to say, because it really isn't anything to say. Rather, it's just simply to be.
One person who lost a toddler under very, very tragic circumstances told me what was the most comforting visit all week. And I'll say it the way he said it. He said an older gentleman with a lot of life experience came in. He said he sat in front of him. And he asked to see a picture of his daughter. He gave him the picture. He looked at the picture. He cried for 10 minutes straight. He gave the picture back. He said the traditional verse that you say as you leave, and that was it. He said that was, without a doubt, the most comforting visit.
But in retrospect, I have to say that that week of the passage between one reality and the next reality, somehow I have to believe in his infinite wisdom, God saw to it that this passage not be taken alone, even while feeling lonely.
Take on a mitzvah. Do something. It can be tiny, but I'm going to do it in memory of this person, and especially if it fits with that person. That's comforting. Now the world's a slightly better place because of that person.
Okay, the key word I want to focus on that video is passage. The Torah's view is that mourning is not a status or a state. It's a period. I mean, a person is passing through. The purpose is to find comfort and to move on, which you'll see in text number 7 on page 179. Sabrina, want to honor us?
Neither cry for the dead nor bemoan him. Neither cry for the dead more than necessary nor bemoan him more than what is prescribed. What does this mean? 3 days for weeping, 7 days for eulogies, and 30 days for the prohibition against wearing new clothing and getting haircuts. More than this, God says, you are not more compassionate than I am.
Right. So what the Torah is saying is, it's okay to mourn, but a person cannot remain in the state of mourning. Now, it doesn't mean if a person cries on day number 4, they're violating a Torah commandment. And if they feel terrible on day number 8, that they're not an observant person. It's a general structure that a person is supposed to move on and slowly adapt to everyday life and to live with the pain, and not that pain should not paralyze him. The question is, though, how do we find comfort? What are the tools? So you see in question for discussion on page 179, what ideas have we learned in the previous lessons that might serve as a consolation for the mourner? You guys have been coming here already for 4 weeks, and I want to share something we've learned in the past 4 weeks. The soul is spiritual. Very good. Very good. So such a shy crowd.
Visiting the grave site to talk to the neshama.
Right. Okay. So all what you're saying is encapsulated and is addressed in the one line we say to the mourners. Everybody knows this line in Hebrew and English. You see in the text number 8a at page 180 is when we get ready to take leave of the mourner, we say, "May God console you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem." So the question is, let's ask you let's see if you can see the question. 2 questions you can think of on this line. We tell a mourner, "May God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem." Any questions on this? No? Guys, you guys got to learn to question more. You have a very intimidating rabbi or a very good rabbi who educates you so well.
Explain it to us.
Oh, there you go. I'm too nice.
What I was just thinking is the fact that there's been a gazillion people died. You're not the only one. It's part of life.
Very good. Very good. There's actually 3 general questions. Your question we'll do at the end. The first question is, why do you say that God should comfort you? If you're doing the comforting, shouldn't you say, "I would like to comfort you," or "May you be comforted"? So question number 1, we're saying is that ultimately, let me get to my slides here. Ultimately, comfort comes from God Himself. Only God can, because no one can understand your pain. No matter what you say, it's never going to be enough. I remember once reading, and Chassidut tells us that the closer the emotion, the deeper the emotion, the harder it is to articulate. Does that make sense? You could talk about how much you love your car, but if I'd ask you how much you love your kids, and you start articulating it, and then you'll say, "But that's not it," because the deeper the emotion, the more connected to you it is, the more you can articulate it. So no matter what I say, it's never going to be enough to comfort you. So we say, listen, only God can truly comfort you, because only He knows really, He can sympathize and empathize and understand what you're going through. The second question is, what is the relation, the connection with Zion and Yerushalayim here? How does that have any connection? So I'm sure you guys all know of Ariel Sharon, the famous general and prime minister of Israel. But I don't know how many of you know, very soon after the 6-Day War, Ariel Sharon had a 5-year-old son. I think Ariel Sharon was outside, and his 5-year-old son was inside the house and found his father's gun, and tragedy ensued. Ariel Sharon, I think his last name was Gur, was his son's name. And the Rebbe wrote a letter to Ariel Sharon, and in the letter he addressed this text we read in 8a. Look at text 8b. This is an excerpt of the letter on page 181. Anna, you want to read?
But not over its inner spiritual essence, contained within the heart of each and every Jew. Over this, the nations have no dominion, and it stands eternally. So too, regarding the mourning of the individual, death delineates only the physical body and concerns of the deceased person. The soul, however, is eternal. It has literally ascended to the world of truth.
It explains in Chassidus that even physical things are indestructible. When you burn something, does it disappear? It just changes. It changes. So what the Rebbe is saying over here is, even physical things are indestructible. When so you had the temple in Jerusalem, so we don't have the house of stone and wood. But the Romans and the Babylonians, they destroyed the house of God, the temple, and they thought that's it, Judaism is over. But there's the soul of Judaism that they can't destroy. And he's saying even physical things change. So a person, a human being, so he doesn't have the body anymore, but the soul still lives on, just like the temple. And in fact, that's why we mention returning back to Israel with the temple 90 times a day. It's not forgotten. You said before, letting go. It's not forgotten. And we see over here, connected to Kriya in text number 9, Rabbi Aaron Moss. He writes something very interesting about what Kriya is all about. Hey, do you want to read? You've had a chance. Text number 9, 182.
Often within their pain, the mourners have an underlying belief that it isn't true, that their loved one hasn't really gone. This is not just denial in a way they are right. Death is not an absolute reality. Our souls exist before we were born, and they continue to exist after we die. The souls that have passed on are still within us. We can't see them, but we sense that they're there. We can't hear them, but we know that they hear us. On the surface, we are apart, but on the surface, nothing can separate us beyond the surface. So we tear our garments. This has a dual symbolism. We are recognizing the loss that our hearts are torn, but ultimately the body is also only a garment that the soul wears. Death is when we strip off one uniform and take on another. The garment may be torn, but the essence of the person within is still intact. From our worldly perspective, death is indeed a tragedy, and the sorrow experienced by the mourners is real. But as they tear their garments, we hope that within their pain, they can sense a glimmer of a deeper truth, that soul is never gone. So
what Aaron Moss, Rabbi Moss, is articulating here so well is that the tearing of the garment is two sides of one coin. Number one, our hearts are torn. So we're tearing our garments. At the same time, we're symbolizing that the body is only a garment. And the soul was vested in this garment, and now it's in the transition. It's changed. So we see here that what's mourning all about is we put the perspective on what the Torah tells us we should do. Focusing on that helps us make this transition. But you have people who are in a lot of pain and they're stuck. And what do we do? What do we do for a person who's stuck with pain? So let's begin with the question for discussion. To analyze pain, what sort of painful, I'm wondering you three, what sort of painful feelings and emotions accompany the loss of a loved one? When someone loses somebody, what kind of pain do they have? Okay. I'm sorry? Guilt. Yes, good. Loneliness. So down. Okay. I'm looking for one more. Anger. Thank you. I was looking for anger, guilt, loneliness. These are all true. But we're going to address two. A lot of them are tied one to the other. People feel angry about the injustice. So I want to put up over here, how would you feel if a 90-year-old dies peacefully in his sleep comparative to a 20-year-old who dies from leukemia? How would these compare? How would you feel about the two? Scenario A, what do you say? What?
I mean, a 90-year-old has lived his life. I mean, he's lived his life.
Yeah, I would feel more okay with a 90-year-old.
So there's loss, but there's not so much pain. Obviously, there's loss, and the family will miss him, but not so much pain. As opposed to the 20-year-old, it's tragic to say, the reaction will be, this is not the way it's supposed to be, right? How could it? There's anger, the injustice of it. There's a way people are supposed to live, and this is not the way the book is supposed to end off, right? One of those novels ends off the way, and so that's a reaction that many times people will have. Okay. Now that you had that reaction, let's look at page 184, the question. Based on what we've learned in the past lessons, is anything we learn by mitigate that feeling of anger and injustice? I'll give you a hint. It was in lesson 1.
Since the time you are born,
Okay.
the date of your death is known.
Very good. In other words, what Radhika is saying is everybody has a set time. Everybody has a set time to live. We said in the first lesson, there is no such thing as a person dying early. Doesn't exist. Every person is given their allotted time. Some people fulfill their mission in a shorter amount of time, and some people fulfill their mission in a longer amount of time. There is no such thing as a person dying early. When God wants to take that person, He takes him. Which leads to a very interesting story in text number 10. The lengthy story, so I will say it shortly while you guys read it. Text number 10 on page 185. One of the greatest sages of the Talmud was a rabbi named Rabbi Yochanan, and he lost a child, a son, at a young age, and he had 5 great students, and they all came to comfort their rabbi. So Rabbi Eliezer walked in and said, "Rabbi, may I say something to try to comfort you?" And he said, "Sure." And he said, "Adam had a son who died early. Right? Cain killed Abel. Abel died early, and Adam went on with life. As it says, he procreated, means he went on to live life. So you too should move on." See, Rabbi Yochanan said, "Not only am I paying for my loss, I'm also paying for Adam." And Rabbi Yeshua said, Job had sons and daughters and everything. He lost it all, and he moved on. So Rabbi Yochanan said, "You haven't helped me." Rabbi Yossi said, Aaron, the high priest, had 2 sons, illustrious sons, who died, and he moved on. Yochanan said, not helping. Rabbi Shimon said, King David had a son who died, and he moved on, not helping. So when it's the 5th student, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, walked in, Rabbi Yochanan says, get ready, get my clothing ready, because he's going to say something I know, and I'm going to be ready to go to the bathhouse, meaning to walk out. So Rabbi Elazar ben Arach says like this, in the last 3 paragraphs of the text. He said, I'd like to share a parable. Your situation can be compared to that of a man who a king entrusted an article for safekeeping. Every day the man would cry and shout, "Woe is to me! When will I be able to return the deposited item undamaged and be relieved of this incredible responsibility I bear? Master, you had a son that he read Torah and prophets and holy writings and studied Mishnah and laws and ethical teachings. He passed from this world without sin. You should be consoled because you returned your deposit in perfect condition." Yochanan responded, Rabbi Elazar, my son, you have comforted me in a most humane fashion. What's the difference between the 4 students and Rabbi Elazar?
Well, the first 4 said, listen, it's happened to a bunch of other people, move on with it.
Exactly. So they said, listen, and not only other people, great people, greater than you. So if they can do it, you can do it. Or you can say, that's very nice, but that's not me. You can't, I'll mention it briefly. One of the most problematic verses in the Torah is in the Shema. It says, you shall love God. Is that a commandment? The rabbis argue this. Maimonides and Nachmanides, they go at it head to head. Because can you command a heart to have an emotion? If you go to somebody and say, the Torah says you shouldn't grieve anymore. But the guy says, but I feel grief. What do you want me to do? So the problem with the first 4 students of Rabbi Elazar is, all they said was, it wasn't personal. The first 4 students of Rabbi Yochanan wasn't personal. It was theoretical. It was abstract. These 4 other people They went through tragedy. We sometimes tell our kids, when I was a kid, I did it. You're gonna suffer too, right? It doesn't work. Right? Rabbi Elazar comes with a personal message, number one, and number two is he offers him a path. The other ones there was no practical application. This is the way they got over it. Yeah, but how? It doesn't say how. Just the fact that they got over it. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach tells Rabbi Yechanan these other, that the death of his son, he's giving him a path to move out. And Rabbi Elazar has two messages. His parable has two messages. Number one is that your child and really everybody is a deposit. Meaning that every day that we have on this earth is a gift. We haven't earned anything. Every day is a gift, and I think there's the saying, probably goes around Facebook or in the emails. That's why it's called the present. Anger and injustice comes from a place where I think I'm entitled to more. If I think I'm entitled to more and then I get less, I get angry. You go to the store, you get incorrect change, you get angry. Only if it's less. If it's more. Right? So when a person feels like they're entitled to more, or that person was entitled to more and they get less, then you feel it was unjust. But if we realize that every single day a person has in this world is a gift, and every single day should be treated as such, then we have no reason to be angry. We're sad, but don't confuse anger and sadness. Number two, the number two message over here is fulfillment. He's saying that based on what we've been learning, we all have a mission to fulfill in this world. God put us down in this world to do something for him. We are messengers of the divine. And when that person fulfills their mission, finish. I often give the example, imagine your UPS guy came and handed you the box and just stayed there. You'd be like, okay, this is freaky. You can go now. You've done your job. Now go. Hey, go ahead.
Isn't our mission based on a previous soul that didn't complete their mission?
We spoke about this last week. It could be one or the other. It could be incomplete mission. It's also a new mission. It could be both. It could be one, the other, or both.
Well, I'm saying it's related to another soul.
Very possibly. Very possibly.
Not
No, there could be a different mission. We explained last week there are 613 separate commandments, and every soul has to fulfill all 613. So it could be a person's reincarnated not as a lack of something that wasn't accomplished, but something new has to be accomplished. Or it could be a lack. That's why we don't know. That's why we have to do all 613. So, sorry if you thought you're going to, right? So now, based on this, the powerful line over here is that there's no such thing as an unfulfilled life. Everybody accomplishes good. So the 90-year-old and the I lost it. Where is it? It's supposed to be there. The 90-year-old and the 20-year-old both live a fulfilled life. So when we have this approach, then the feeling of injustice, the feeling of anger is mitigated. Still sad, but we don't have the feeling of anger. Number two is, someone said, guilt. Many times when we lose a loved one, we have this feeling of, I wish I would have told her what I felt. I wish I wouldn't have spoken that way. I wish I would have called him. I would have kept in touch. And now it's all over. Now that opportunity is past. Look at the question for discussion on page 189. What ideas have we learned in previous lessons that can mitigate these feelings of guilt? Wow. We're not moving here until... So now, if we looked at death as final, then this feeling of guilt would be very understandable. But as we spoke about in other classes, that, as we said, we see here in the slide, death does not terminate our relationship. It only changes its form. That means there's still a possibility for us to connect to the ones that have passed on. And you see, and how does that connection? Look at text number 11. Rab Aaron of Karlin, the Karliner Rav, writes, this connection is through Yizkor, is through Kaddish, is through doing mitzvahs. He says saying Kaddish is like sending regards. Learning Mishnah is like sending a letter. And doing a mitzvah, doing good deeds, is like sending a package. So yeah, we can't send flowers because the soul doesn't appreciate physical gifts, but now the relationship has changed. So for example, when you want to give your child a gift when the child is a baby, so you give them a car or a Barbie doll. When they're 16 or 17, 18, you have to give them a phone. You have to. That's what society says. They need a phone, right? And when they're 20, they need a car, right? As we age, the gifts we exchange, they change based on where we stand in life. So I remember hearing this example from a rabbi. He said, when I was 5 years old, I wanted to do something special for my father. So I made an outline on my hand, I colored it in, and I wrote, I love Tati. But then when I was 40 years old, I decided I wanted to do something for my father. It's like I made an outline of my hand, and I colored it in, and I wrote, I love Tati. My father calls me up and says, you okay? Everything is, what's with the picture of the hand? Right? Because the gift you give and you get when you're 40 is not the same. So yes, while a person is here in physical form, we would give them one type of gift, but now that the person has moved on to more of a spiritual existence, doesn't mean we can't connect. Doesn't mean we can't give a gift. It means the gift has to be a spiritual one, a mishnah, a good deed, doing something for the sake of the neshama, as you saw in the video. So now we see that we have no reason to feel guilty. But now this can motivate us to doing something really, really great. Okay, let's move on to now the people visiting the Shiva house. We've dealt with the person sitting in the Shiva house, and we haven't dealt with the people visiting the Shiva house. There's a mitzvah you see in text number 12. There's a mitzvah that you have to go visit and comfort the mourning. It's a mitzvah. And Maimonides writes it. That means it's law. The question is, how do we provide comfort? What do you say? What do you do to make the person feel better? If you see the questions on page 190, many of us, you walk in and you're very, very uncomfortable because you don't know what to say. You don't want to offend, and you're just not sure. So you see on text number 13, the Talmud says, just be there. Just show up. The very fact that you're there shows that you care for them and you're there. You don't have to say anything. Just sit down and be there. If they want to talk, they'll talk. And in fact, that says, you see in text number 14, you're not allowed to talk. You don't talk until the mourner opens the conversation, because you don't know what they want to say. You don't know about what they want to talk about. So number one is be there for the mourner. The etiquette is silence. Number two, the mourner opens up the conversation. Number three, some people think they have this attitude that it's a sad environment, so I'm going to lighten the mood and make jokes. Not the time to make jokes. It's not a party. It's well intended. It's very nice, but it's not proper. Number four, don't use anything you learned in this class. Right? You say, well, I went to this class about Journey for the Soul, and I learned about all these great things. Don't become Aristotle. Don't philosophize and start saying, what you learned and all these smart things, which are all true. But there's, like King Solomon said, there's a time for everything under the heavens. And now's not the time. And then there's some no things you shouldn't say. These are things that people ask these questions, like, were you there when they died? Did she die from cancer or from the chemo? Did you know in advance or was it sudden? Did they have life insurance? Now God only takes the new ones. And you shouldn't begin any statement with, at least, or you need, or don't, and don't compare losses. You focus on the mourner. And because the mourner is focusing on their loved one, and you should also focus. And do not discuss, back here, do not discuss the cause of death prematurely. It's not the right time. What we should do is focus on the legacy and the positive things that the person left behind. Because why? This helps direct the person from depression to mourning. So you see here. So there we go. So it focuses on the gift of life that was. I mean, the person came and they lived, and you discuss all the great things the person accomplished. And when you do that, then you say, wow, this person really did something. Maybe I can incorporate that into my life too. And that, going back to what we said before, that is actually doing something for the soul. There's a very, very nice appendix. On Appendix A, it's a little late, and that appendix is a little long. But it's really, really good about an old person who he writes an article about how he felt and how he grieves, and how time passes and he never forget, and all these things. I really encourage you to read it. But the final text for the night, text number 15. The Midrash on Kohelet, the class to see, says the final word is a person should say, that man was a God-fearing man. That's someone I can learn from. See what people are saying about him. God says the ministering angels comes to them and says, was he a good guy or not? Well, see what the rumor is. If everyone says he was a good guy, then he was a good guy. If we can learn, and this is why it's very powerful, if we can learn from our loved ones that have passed, and then we can implement, not only learn, the learning is nothing unless you implement. And we can implement something that they've accomplished in their life and into our own life, then we're doing something for the soul. We're connected. And saying what Doug said before, about forgetting, he brought that up before, losing, letting go. We're never letting go, because that person is constantly with us. So, for example, many people like to donate a Torah, for example, or a book, if they can't donate a Torah. Why? Because every time you open up that book, like you open up a siddur or a chumash, many of our siddurim and our chumashim here are dedicated in memory of a loved one. Why? Because every time you open up that book and that book is being used, then that person hasn't departed and is gone, forgotten. Opposite. Now we're using that person's memory as a stimulus for something great. And I want to direct you to Appendix C. For the end of the letter, Appendix C on page 198. This is another part of the letter the Rebbe sent to Ariel Sharon. At first glance, the connection between the mourner, to whom this blessing is directed, and the mourners of Jerusalem's destruction appears to be quite puzzling. What do we care? In truth, or whatever, they are connected. For the main consolation embodied by this phrase is its inner content. It means the grief over Zion and Jerusalem is common to all sons and daughters of our people. This is something I have to remember. That you're lost, you said before, that millions of people have died. You're lost, you're not alone, you're not an individual. Just as all the Jews mourn for Jerusalem and actually see the Western Wall, and they're in great pain and grief over destruction, so too it is the grief of a single individual Jew or Jewish family shared by the entire nation. For the sages taught all the Jews comprise of one integral organism. We're all one unit. So when a person suffers, mourns, we help them transition. We're all one community. We all look out for each other. And this is the way the Torah says a person's transitions from mourning to life again. Wrong way. And now it's time for the key points.
Key points. Lesson 5.